Today I'm on UFC 5 and we're going to let the game decide who the best heavyweight fighter of all time is through a single elimination tournament. UFC 5 has about 40 heavyweight fighters in the game. I looked through all of them and I took 18 of the best of them all in their prime. And I ranked them based on their primes and seeded them accordingly. The lowest ranked fighter is 18 seed Dan Severn, who most notably won UFC 5 and UFC Ultimate 95. I've seen all of his UFC fights, and in today's world and with his same set of skills, he wouldn't make it past a regional scene, but he was the first big guy who showed up with wrestling skills, and he looked like a miracle worker back then. So that's going to barely get him a spot in this tournament. At number 17 is one of my favorite fighters of all time, Don Frye. This man right here was, in my opinion, the most entertaining fighter of all time. He showed up for two reasons and two reasons only: to knock some teeth out and spread democracy. He won UFC 8 and UFC Ultimate 96 with two fists and a great mustache. I had Mark Kerr at number 16, but I found out that I missed a window to buy him in the game, so I replaced him with Stefan Struve. Struve shouldn't make this list, but he is the tallest UFC fighter ever at 6'11", so we're going to slide him in for some fun. For the number 15 seed, I've got Mark Coleman. He won the UFC 10 and 11 tournaments, then beat Dan Severn in UFC 12 to become the first ever official heavyweight champion. In his prime, he looked unbeatable. He even somehow beat the steroid allegations. But like the fighters before him in this list, the skill gap between the 1990s and now is huge, and that might be evident in this simulation. At number 14 is Andrei Arlovski. He's a well-known name because he started fighting in the UFC before 9/11 and retired post-COVID. But in his prime in 2005, he looked like a new breed at heavyweight, which won him the belt as well as 2 title defenses. Number 13 is Bas Rutten. He was running through the competition at Pancrase in his prime. He won the UFC heavyweight belt in 1999, but sadly he had to relinquish it 34 days later due to injuries. He's one of the greatest what-ifs of UFC history, especially considering the fact that he retired on a 22-fight winning streak. He's more of a light heavyweight, but even with a 203-pound character, they still have a heavyweight version of him in the game, because he's Bas Rutten. For number 12, we have our first modern UFC heavyweight in Alexander Volkov, who is currently the number 2 contender and should be number 1. At number 11 is Derek Lewis, but in his 2021 Fight Night version, he's currently ranked as the number 8 heavyweight contender, but in 2018 he knocked out Volkov and he has bricks for hands, so argue with a wall. At number 10 is Minotauro Nogueira, the once interim UFC champion in 2008. He was the first dominant BJJ heavyweight and spent most of his career exclusively fighting super fights. Number 9 is Ciryl eye-gouging Gane. He is 0-3 in his title attempts, which isn't impressive compared to the men ranked below him, but he's a top modern heavyweight, which would likely dominate the men before him. At number 8, we have Junior Dos Santos, a one-time UFC champion who looked like a force to be reckoned with until other greater forces knocked him out. One of those men being number 7, Alistair Overeem. He was never a champion and only had one chance against Stipe. There was also some steroid use that kept him out of the picture, yet in the picture in the first place, but he's still one of the greatest fighters of all time in my opinion. Number 6 is Tom Aspinall, the man who scared the GOAT into retirement. If he would have finished Gane, I probably would have moved him a few spots higher, but the competition only gets stiffer from here. Free my boy, number 5 is Cain Velasquez, one of the scariest fighters ever. He was the guy who dethroned Brock Lesnar in his peak. His only losses were to 3 of the best fighters of all time, and 2 of them came in his last 3 fights while dealing with injuries and old age. At number 4 is Daniel Cormier, one of the only fighters to hold 2 belts in 2 different weight classes. There's a reason he gets along with the Russians. This man can wrestle. His only losses were to prime John Jones, and he lost his final 2 fights to prime Stipe Miocic. Which brings us to the number 3 fighter, Stipe Miocic, the man people widely regard as the best heavyweight of all time for having the most title defenses in UFC history. With the second seed is Fedor Emelianenko, who is probably the best fighter to never fight in the UFC, but throughout his career he beat several former UFC champions, including fighters on this list, while also going on a ridiculous 28-fight winning streak in his prime. Which leaves us with number 1, John Jones. I wish there was a way I could not put him here, but he is still, in my opinion, the best fighter in human history, and he won the belt at heavyweight, so I don't see any way around it. So those are the fighters, and this is the bracket, which will include a preliminary round with the 4 lowest ranked fighters, but it's time to get started. All fights will be fought through the AI on pro difficulty with 5 accelerated clock rounds. First up is the play-in round, and the first fight will be between 16 seed 6'11" Stefan Struve and number 17 seed 6 foot Don Frye. Winner fights John Jones in the next round. In round 1, Don Frye ragdolled the skyscraper like he was Al Qaeda himself, and he also landed some solid ground and pound strikes. Back in Fry's day, if he chose to fight with shoes, that meant you couldn't kick. But Fry didn't see anything about that in today's rulebook, so he landed the first stunning strikes of the fight on Struve with a few head kicks. Fry also has a perfect 100 rating for clinch strikes, which led to him cutting Struve's face. So Struve said his 11-inch reach advantage wasn't enough and turned into a wrestler. But they got back up, and Struve was getting pretty tired of feeling the soul of Fry's Asics. So he countered the head kick with a big overhand right that stunned him. But that was the high point of the fight for Struve because Don Fry started to dominate after that wake-up call and punched Struve in the head until Herb Dean pulled him off. For the other preliminary fight, we have 15-seed Mark Coleman versus 18-seed Dan Severn, a fight that Mark Coleman won in 1997. These men are pretty even on paper, but they wear their weight a bit differently. They're also both wearing shoes, so the head kick should be interesting if they're flexible enough. Mark Coleman got the fight started early with a good combination in the first minute, and he followed that up with a takedown, but the ground game bar is low here. Severn went for a guillotine and nearly got it, but even after failing to submit him, he still took the top position. In round 2, Coleman went for a takedown in the first 20 seconds but was reversed. Usually this animation doesn't look realistic compared to UFC fights today, but this holds up in this era. And in more true 1990s UFC fashion, Severn's strategy was to lay on Coleman and do 1 HP shots until they're both exhausted. But apparently Severn's been hanging out with the Brazilians lately. He went for a Kimura, Coleman was fighting it off well, but then Severn put his hairy balls on Coleman's head and, well, he had enough of that. He tapped instantly, and Dan Severn is going to be moving on to the next round to fight a slight increase in competition in Fedor Emelianenko. For our first round fight, number 1 John Jones will face number 17 Don Fry, who again has an 11-inch reach disadvantage. Jones was using that reach at first, but went for the takedown. However, Fry somehow tossed Jones to the mat. He went for a Kimura, but John just simply got out of that and took his back, then proceeded to ground and pound him in full mount. The skill gap was starting to look pretty accurate. John went for an armbar and nearly got it, but Don Fry's a man's man. He's not going to tap to that. He'd rather be ground and pounded like the good old days. In round 2, John went for another early takedown, but somehow Fry reversed him again. I thought he might actually stand a chance, but then again, it seems like John could just get up whenever he feels like it. Fry went back to his bread and butter and hit John with a left hook that opened up a bad cut, and for some reason, he followed that up with a takedown. John went for a guillotine, which usually never works in this game, but Fry isn't your modern MMA fighter. He actually got him with that one. Next up is number 8 Junior Dos Santos versus number 9 Ciryl Gane, who are very similarly built fighters, and I think Dana might have jumped the gun on updating Gane in this game because this is not the same fighter from what I've seen from him before. Gane was an absolute savage in this fight. He started it off with a flying knee that left JDS stunned. He was dropping him with basic punches. He was landing big kicks left and right, and before I knew it, JDS was unconscious. So it looks like we'll be having a rematch in the second round between John Jones and the new and improved Ciryl Gane. We have another matchup of old versus new between number 5 Cain Velasquez and number 12 Alexander Volkov. Volkov has a 6-inch height advantage, but this isn't basketball. Cain brought him to the mat 30 seconds into the fight and wasn't letting him go anywhere. Cain then stunned Volkov on the mat with big elbows. He then tried the strategy of death by 1,000 cuts, and after one really big cut, Cain finished Volkov in the first round. Facing him in the next round will be between 4-seed Daniel Cormier and 13-seed Bas Rutten. It was no surprise that DC was going to use his wrestling in this fight, but Bas Rutten was no slouch. He was able to get out of a few tough positions and likely did the most damage in the first round. He then started round 2 by landing a jumping head kick on DC, and he also checked a leg kick at the end of the round that stunned his leg. In all likelihood, Bas Rutten is probably up 2-0, but DC didn't sign up for a kickboxing fight. Even though Bas Rutten was able to get up several times in the fight, DC was going to get him down on the mat by any means necessary, which eventually led to some ground and pound that finished the fight. Moving on to the bottom side of the bracket, we're starting off with number 3 Stipe Miocic versus number 14 Andrei Arlovski. You know, I kind of miss the era of Stipe, and I'm still not exactly sure what he excels at, but he was just way better than Andrei at fighting in general. Andrei was a step behind in every exchange and paid the ultimate price for it, that being his consciousness being separated from his body. He was knocked out with one big punch by round 3. Next up is a clash of modern fighters between number 6 Tom Aspinall and number 11 Prime Derek Lewis. Things started off looking pretty good for Derek. He was sticking to the game plan and defending the takedowns, but he got a little overconfident and went for a jumping head kick, which got him sacked to the mat, and to no surprise, he was not able to recover from that mistake for the rest of the round. Round 2 is underway, and Lewis is going to stun Tom with a head kick and a big left hook. If Derek can keep this fight on the feet, he can win this, but of course Tom knows that as well, or maybe not. Tom was able to take him down, but for some reason he decided to let him up. They were both exchanging some big shots on the feet, but Lewis has one punch power like no other. He dropped Tom with a straight right, but Tom is going to wisely go for another takedown and not just allow him back up this time. He's sunk in a head and arm triangle choke, and Lewis isn't getting out of this one. He taps and he's eliminated. Meaning in round 2, number 3 Stipe will face number 6 Aspinall. Up next is two old heads with number 7 Alistair Overeem facing number 10 Minotaur Nogueira. This fight has taken place twice in Pride, with Nogueira winning by decision in TKO. The fight started off slow, but in the second half of the first round, Nogueira rocked Overeem with an overhand and left hook. Then out of nowhere, Nogueira went for a flying armbar submission, which only resulted with him being in his guard. But he's Brazilian, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. Round 2 had some nice clinch fighting, with Nogueira stunning Overeem again with a right hook, but Overeem was able to respond with a knee to the face that knocked down Nogueira. But Big Nog had enough of that. He turned this back into a ground game fight. In round 3, Nogueira wanted to keep this on the mat, but Overeem stuffed a takedown in a way I didn't know was possible. He just kicked him in the leg really hard. But Nogueira had some tricks up his sleeve as well. Overeem wasn't going to just let the Brazilian pull guard, so Big Nog had to trick him into thinking he was hurt by getting knocked down by a knee in the clinch. Overeem followed him down to the mat, and from there he had him right where he wanted him. Nogueira reversed the position, put him in a triangle, transitioned it into an armbar, and deep into the 4th round, Overeem tapped, and Nogueira is moving on to the next round to fight, in all likelihood, Fedor, unless Severn can pull off a miracle. But we're going to give him a fair shot against the Last Emperor, and Dan Severn started this fight off with a bang. He got the takedown, which turned into a guillotine, but he got out of it and did some ground and pound. However, with a minute and a half left in the round, Fedor just hugged him really hard and rolled him over, which led to a deep head and arm triangle that almost had Severn tapping. In round 2, Severn got another takedown in the first 30 seconds, except this time he didn't give up the position for the entirety of the round. And again in round 3, Severn got another early takedown and is probably winning on the scorecards at this point. But these new generations of fighters are doomed. All they want to do is grab limbs and yank on them. From the bottom, Fedor went for an armbar and Severn quickly tapped, which will eliminate all of the OG UFC fighters from the tournament. And Fedor will advance to face Nogueira in the next round. For our first round 2 fight is a rematch between number 1 John Jones and number 9 Ciryl Gane. Of course, John easily beat Ciryl in their first matchup, but based on Cyryl's last fight, I think he's been using some of John's old training methods, so they might be more evenly matched this time. On the feet, these two were spamming elbows at each other, which was fun, but John decided to take this fight to the mat. However, after a few punches, Ciryl was able to get back up. John didn't want to catch any more of his elbows, so he grabbed his back. He then jumped on his back, but I don't think he thought he'd make it this far, so he just kind of hung out there until they were both too tired. In round 2, John secured another takedown and some ground and pound until Ciryl was able to kick his way out of it. On the feet, Ciryl drew first blood. He followed that up with a head kick that stunned John, and he followed that up with something John couldn't see coming: another head kick, which knocked John down. John was able to score some points in this fight, but Ciryl has apparently perfected his craft and is now an expert kickboxer, which puts Ciryl well ahead on the scorecards. John had some close submission attempts on the mat, but those were more so last-ditch efforts in a fight he was losing. The fight went the distance, and Gane won the decision 49-46. Meeting Gane in the semifinals is between number 4 DC and number 5 Kane. They started this fight off mildly by exchanging body shots before Kane went for a takedown that DC ended up reversing. DC maintained ground control for the rest of the round, but didn't do much with it. We got another entertaining 30 seconds in round 2. DC even drew first blood of the fight, but Kane ended the charade with a takedown. He wasn't reversed this time, so he gave DC a taste of his own medicine by laying on him for the entirety of the round. Kane was on top again in the third round. He worked his way into full mount, and DC is whitewashed, so he didn't resist. And that, my basketball people, is how you end up on Midwest safety and not police activity. He sat there and took his beating, including a handful of stunning elbows, until Kane TKO'd him with 30 seconds left in the round. Up next, we have number 3 Stipe facing number 6 Aspinall. Stipe started this fight off strong with an early stun after a double uppercut on Tom's chin. Tom took the fight to the mat, where they were pretty evenly matched. They went back and forth reversing each other, but Tom got the best of him in the ground and pound by the end of the round. Round 2 had more takedowns for Tom, but Stipe kept finding his way back up and ended up landing the biggest shot of the round. Round 3 was slow, but Tom managed to land the first knockdown of the fight with an overhand right, although I'm not too sure how he was capable of doing that. He went to the stool and he looks like he's fighting with one eye, like all the French and John Jones fans want him to, for the rest of his career. And I think that lack of eyesight is starting to have an effect on him. He went for back-to-back spinning strikes out of desperation, and that left him stunned in round 4. Stipe chased a finish off of that, and he almost had him, but the bell bought Tom another round. By round 5, both fighters are looking tired, but especially Tom. And oh boy, this looks familiar. The doctor has stepped in to look at Tom's eye. Yeah, that eye's gone, but if he wants to prove the 50 IQ kids on Twitter wrong, he needs to tighten up his bootstraps and fight through this. And for better or worse, the doctor is going to let him keep fighting. But Tom's vision was the least of his problems in this one. He was gassed out by now, and any big strike that landed had him wobbled. He tried going for a submission, but that was quickly fought off. So these two went to a decision. Neither of them are looking too good at this point, but the decision is going to go to Stipe by a 1-round difference. And for the last fight of the second round, we have the Battle of the Old Heads, with number 2 Fedor taking on number 10 Nogueira. The best moment of this fight was by far when Nogueira slammed his way out of a triangle, but this was the most uneventful fight yet. They went for takedown after takedown on each other, especially Nogueira, but just based on Fedor's ability to transition out of every position, he's going to win this one by a split decision. There was one health event in this entire fight, and almost 3/4 of the fight was spent on the mat. Real barn burner. But we're in the semifinals now, and up first is number 5 Cain Velasquez versus number 9 roided out Ciryl Gane. A minute into the round, Cain landed a takedown in the middle of the mat. Cain ended up taking his back, and Gane wasn't resisting much, so Cain ended up punching him in the side of the head until he was unconscious. So, just like that, Cain is moving on to the finals. And meeting him there is between number 2 Fedor Emelianenko and number 3 Stipe Miocic. A few minutes into round 1, they simultaneously went for a takedown. Stipe landed his, but Fedor's best skill is apparently reversing positions on the mat, so he took the top and grounded pounded Stipe for most of the first round. In round 2, Fedor landed a takedown in the first minute and never got off Stipe, and he included a stunning shot in his grounded pound, so he's likely up 2-0 on the scorecards. But round 3 was a completely different fight because they stayed on their feet and it paid off early for Stipe. He started off with landing a stunning elbow in close. He kept countering well with the hooks. He stunned and knocked down Fedor a minute later, and maybe countering is what Stipe excels at. He caught Fedor again on the way in and left him on his back, but he didn't take the bait. Fedor then landed a stunning strike on Stipe. Fedor is pretty damaged at this point, so Stipe answered back with a straight that knocked Fedor down, but once again, Stipe is wise enough to keep it on the feet, and by round 4, Fedor's health was done for. Stipe kept dropping him with every shot that landed, and with about a minute left in the round, Stipe finished the job and will be moving on to the finals to face Cain Velasquez. So in the final, we have what I ranked as the number 3 and number 5 heavyweight of all time. Cain stunned Stipe a minute and a half into the fight. They were both landing on each other, but it seems like Cain has a slight power advantage here. He even went on to knock down Stipe in round 1. And in round 2, it didn't start off any better for Stipe. He was stunned again in the first 30 seconds. He was fighting smart, he was even investing in the body, but Cain seemed to be going all in on Stipe's chin, and it was paying dividends. But finally, Stipe showed up with 3 minutes to go in the second. He stunned Cain with an overhand right, and Cain just kind of stood there, so Stipe was able to follow that up with a knockdown. Stipe just showed up to this fight, but Cain is still swinging away, and as he's doing that, Stipe is going to catch him with an uppercut on the way in, and somehow end this fight right here with a knockout. I don't know where that came from, but I guess the people were right. Stipe Miocic is the best heavyweight fighter of all time. And obviously Ciryl Gane is top 4. But that'll do it. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't even bother liking this video. Please just go watch some Don Fry highlights for me. But I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one.